the leper star versus Israel in Isaiah 53, a guilt offering. What is the Messiah's name? The rabbis said his name is the leper star, as it is written, surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him a leper, smitten of God and afflicted. And that's from the Sanhedrin 98, small case B. The belief that Isaiah 53 describes the Jewish people as the man Israel, that is often attributed to Rashi, is now the prevalent teaching on the subject. Rabbis Singer of Outreach Judaism is one of the most followed on the internet, and his analysis of Isaiah 53 being Israel. His analysis is very similar to Christians, in that he believes the animal atonement and worship laws of the Torah are to be applied to a man, to men actually, and women and children of the Holocaust. The Christians call Jesus the unblemished Lamb of God. Rabbi Singer says the Jewish people who were murdered and slaughtered in the Holocaust were ram guilt offerings for the purpose which might prosper of having the Jewish people return to the promised land. That would be God's purpose that might prosper in chapter 53. Rabbi Singer's commentary from his midrash, Isaiah 53, Jesus or Israel, on Isaiah 53:10. This is posted on a Facebook page. The end of it says, share this with all your friends. In other words, anybody can use it. So, yeah. And everybody should know that, by the way. You can't just use something that's on somebody's site. But if you're given the authorization to CJ, it's okay, but you still can't perjure or slander them. I'm a lawyer. I don't practice, but I am a lawyer, and I know these things. So, I'm just going to really deal with 53:10. I'm not going to go through his whole midrash or anything. It's the one verse that you can't just prove by physical evidence. He offered himself for guilt. You know, all you can do is take somebody's word for it that you did. Except there is a little bit more. In any event, I am going to read, this is in quotes, there's no, I didn't do anything, I didn't even make corrections with his background or anything. This is exactly as it is in his midrash in Isaiah 53 that he had posted on Facebook in his notes many years ago. I was a friend of his at the time. So I'm sharing it. I'm sharing 53:10, but I'm going to give my commentary on it, contrasting it with his commentary and the problems I see with that, which is not an unusual thing the Jews have always done, but in particular in the times of the Talmud, Rashi, Rambam, they were always writing about each other and what that person thought and this and that. So I'm going to read everything because it's in quotes, and I don't want someone to say I misquoted something, because I'm not. So he starts out, and he quotes himself, 53:10. Hashem desired to oppress him, and he afflicted him if his soul would acknowledge guilt. He would see offspring and live long days, and the desire of Hashem would succeed in his hand. Then he quotes 53:10 from the Jewish Publication Society. He doesn't say where the first one came from. I recognize it, but I don't know where it came from either. But the Lord chose to crush him by disease, that if he made himself an offering for guilt, he might see offspring and have long life, and that through him the Lord's purpose might prosper. this translation by the Jewish Publication Society of the Hebrew into English began in, I believe it's 1956, from scratch. They did use old texts from the Talmud era. The Old Testament of the Christians is from a Greek translation, and then into English, and translations are tough enough as it is without going through two instead of just directly one. And the rabbis and scholars on language who were involved with that process for many, many years began with the Leningrad Codex, the oldest Hebrew translation of the Hebrew, the oldest Hebrew Bible written in Hebrew. And they translated it. It's one that's been used for hundreds of years. So then, after these two verses of 53:10 from different sources, here's what he has to say. Not only are we stuck with the same God punishment, God situation here, as we were before, this one is even more perplexing. Yeshua was supposed to be the sinless, unblemished Lamb that died for your sins on the cross, and yet it states right here that if he would have acknowledged his guilt, he would see offspring and live long days. The JQS, Jewish Publication Society, rendering gives a little different twist to an already sticky situation. It says, parentheses, epistle referring to Yeshua, close friend, that the Lord chose to crush him by disease. I don't know if you can classify a cross as a disease or not, but I don't think hanging and being crushed are the same thing either. In fact, according to John's Gospel, not a single bone of Yeshua's body was broken. Of course, this is stated so he could be equated with the Passover lamb, and John is the only one that compares Yeshua to the Passover lamb. But how could this be speaking about eternal Israel? Very easy. The offering of guilt in this verse is actually, literally translated as guilt offering. The significance between the guilt offering and the Holocaust is so astounding, even as grotesque of a thought as it is, I could not overlook it. The guilt offering is defined in Leviticus chapter 7, and goes something like this. The guilt offering is a fire offering in which all the parts are to go up in smoke, and the high belongs to the one making the offering. I mentioned before that during the Holocaust, Hitler not only burned Jews in the ovens of Auschwitz, but he also used their skins as lampshades and their hair as stuffing for pillows. He sacrificed these peoples on the altars of ovens and kept their hides as his portion, but not until he worked and starved them to death. So, after the atrocities of World War II, the Lord's purpose had prospered, because the land that was sworn to us is once again being inhabited by its rightful owners and is awaiting the final ingathering. The guilt offering, that's it for the quotes. That's his commentary on verse 2. The guilt offering is a sacrifice made for unintentional transgressions. It was distinct from the biblical sin offering. The transgressor furnished an unblemished lamb for sacrifice at the temple in Jerusalem, as well as in cases of sins against holy idols, theft, commission of fraud, or false oaths, with monetary compensation to the victims for their loss. Plus they marked up to 20% of the value to cover the priest's earnings. That's the guilt offering. And offering for guilt, translated by the JPS, says he offered, God chose to crush him with his knee so that he would offer himself for guilt. That's the literal translation. The literal translated is he offered himself for guilt. Doesn't say anything about the guilt offering. Doesn't say he became the guilt offering. You got to his wife. Doesn't say anything like that. The Jewish people murdered in the Holocaust had not made any unintentional transgressions against Hitler and did not make monetary compensation to Hitler if they did. It is the people Israel that makes themselves an offering for guilt, and Rabbi Singer analysis, though he seems to be saying Hitler made a guilt offering to God of blemished rams. And these are this is an unblemished Lamb of God, the unblemished rams of God for guilt offering sacrifices. These are all just regular people. Everybody has some sins in their life. So they technically, if this is what happened, I really can't figure out what he's done here. But I do my best. I try to keep an open mind. But you can't offer an animal in any of the offerings that's blemished, defective, sick, disease. You can't offer them. God won't accept them. And human beings are not a part of an animal sacrificial and atonement system of learning. Learning what sin is. Learning, it can cost you. You might have to give up your prize to animal if you want to be forgiven by God. And it teaches you how to cook your food. It's a system he did away with through his prophets. Isaiah chapter 1, Amos, Psalms. He told the Jewish people. Not only did he say, do not sacrifice your children, which they were doing to the fire god all too often, but he told them, I no longer want your animals. Stop sinning is what it all boils down to. And this is even picked up in the book of Hebrews as a Christian. Basically, Jesus said, God no longer wants bulls and goats for sin. He has prepared my body to sacrifice for sin. The final sacrifice. His body prepared by God. I don't believe that any more than I believe God would accept a blemished Lamb of God, because, and I've already shown the video, you cannot deceive. It's written in the scripture with how he manipulated and lied and changed verses. He's a liar and a deceiver. He's a false prophet. He prophesied 5 times of his return and he never did it. And he even said it's going to be quickly, it's going to be quickly, it's going to be quickly. That's been over 2,000 years. But basically, it was his generation. When he was born, everybody alive at that moment is his generation. When they're all dead, his generation goes. They're all dead. He said, I preach you shall see me return. Sounds kind of Vincent, kind of like the movies you see with the fellow getting ready to be electrocuted and tells the one, I'm coming back. Partial. You, the people of Caesarea, there are those amongst you who will see me return. And never did. You, members of my 12, there are those amongst you who will be alive when I return. And never did. My favorite, Book of Revelation. The great story of destruction of all things, and Jesus comes, and the Jews that don't believe in him are not only killed, they're put in hell. Judaism doesn't even believe in a hell. If they don't believe in Jesus, well, why would you believe a liar, a deceiver, in a book of lies and deceit? People who believe in human sacrifice. being healed by the blood or the death of another? Do they not want to be responsible for their own actions as it is? It's a sick, sick religion. And if you knew God as I knew God, you would know how repulsed he is at the thought that he would offer a human sacrifice to anyone, much less the Gentiles. He doesn't get any. You sacrifice to the gods the man is dead to receive favor. What favor did the Gentiles give God with their presence in heaven? The continued sinning. I've been told Jesus won't just forgive your sins if you accept him. He's going to forgive all the sins you make the rest of your life. Because he already knows you're going to do it. So he's forgiven you. I walked out thinking to myself, I got carte blanche. I can go do anything I accept this Jesus. But no, I don't accept Jesus. Indeed, I don't think he ever existed. I think he's a story. And I have good reason for that. But let's get back to God murdering his children. I don't think Hitler offered them. So here's these brands. Somebody had to offer them, so God's going to offer them. Not unlike he offered his son. There's no explaining. And I haven't even considered it. So, Hitler sacrificed these people on the altars of ovens. These ovens to get rid of bodies of fire and become altars. And took their hides as his portion. It's very interesting. Because in verse 11 of Isaiah 53, the righteous servant who makes the many righteous receives as his portion the many, and as his spoil the multitude. The reference is to the people he's making righteous, the many. Many will be made righteous. A righteous servant makes the many righteous. Your portion, the many. You keep your followers. Maybe you'll donate to your cause, giving God's temple a little bit. But I gotta wade through rabbis like this. And Jews for Judaism and Michael Sobak, who basically just ignores sin. It's so simple. If you're going to use Israel as the man to be identified in Isaiah 53, who's supposed to be God's representative, like Moses in the day of the Lord, but if you're going to use them, you're going to have to use them as God used them with Moses. You gather every single one of them. They have to agree to a man. I want to know when all Jews got together as one and were plagued by God with disease and brought to grief with sickness, that they would offer themselves for guilt to God. They give them long life and make the many righteous. How many people did the murdered Jews of the Holocaust make righteous? How many of them saw their children after that? None of it makes sense. And Hitler's portion, is it him? Did he make the offering? Why is he getting a portion? Is Hitler the righteous servant of God? That's what he's saying. It's mind-boggling. And yeah, he's got thousands and thousands and thousands of Jewish people believing this. And I'm that man. I'm God's representative. I am his Moses. And this is what I got to wait for. Those people that follow Tovia, they'll throw you out of a group so fast, even suggesting, hey, it could be Elijah with the same purpose. They both have to make people righteous, bring them back to Judaism, and they both have a task which might prosper. God's purpose in Isaiah 53 is not stated. We don't know it until Malachi 3, which is where God announces the day of the Lord. And he says, I'm sending my messenger, who is Elijah, and I'm going to return to my temple suddenly. That's his purpose. Okay, so picking back up. Rabbi Singers seems to be saying that Hitler is the man of Isaiah 53 who makes an offer of Israel, the Jewish people, which again would have to be all of them if you're going to call them Israel, as a Leviticus land guilt offering. And Hitler receives his portion, their house. Isaiah 53:12 says, God's righteous servant, which is Israel, and we're using the 6 million of the Holocaust as Israel, as best I can tell. Because the rest of the Jews, another 6 million, didn't offer that 6 million up, and that's not what he says. He's saying God did it. Because God's purpose was, I want y'all back in the promised land. So he murdered and created the Holocaust. I guess he raised Hitler up for that purpose. But I don't think so. I don't understand thinking like that either. I don't get it one bit. But that's me. I couldn't believe it when I read this. I really couldn't. And I'm going to offer myself for guilt. The guilt that the Jewish people feel from not being righteous, which is why they're sick and suffering in the opening verses, who are the witnesses. It's not kings, as everybody seems to think from chapter 52. There's a reason there in quotes. And then God says, well, you got to be suitable for my purpose. And the purpose is, I want you to go make these sinners, these people who are sick, emotionally sick, from being unrighteous, by being my righteous servant. That makes them any righteous. But you got to be made ready. And I have a process you're not going to believe. It's like getting the cadet ready to be a Marine or a Navy SEAL, except multiply that by about 10 million. It's in his power, and with me, he came to me in the womb to be certain that I lived a life of suffering, filled with disease and injuries, and there's many other things. It's in the book. He came to the womb of Jeremiah to make sure Jeremiah was a priestly, godly man. I was the exact opposite, an atheist for 60 years. And I had a furious spirit just like Moses and just like Ezekiel. So, verse 12 of chapter 53 of Isaiah says, God's righteous servant is exposed to death. He is exposed to death by disease, from an affliction by God. God chose to touch him with disease. Then he says, well, I'm going to reward him because he was exposed to death. It's a disease, it's a sickness that can kill you. With me, it was cancer. There's other diseases that can kill you. Skin cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, untreatable lung cancer. And here is my proof that I offered myself for guilt. I said early on, there's no physical proof, but there's some indirect proof. I was told I had no more than a month or so to live, to be prepared to die, based on pictures of my lungs, each one. Doctor said, you see those? This is after colon cancer and chemotherapy for colon cancer. That should have killed me. And he said, you see all those white spots all over your lung? He says, every one of them is cancer. It's growing cancer. It's too advanced to even tell you. It should have come in earlier on the colon cancer. So everybody gets sick if you think you might have a problem, or when they say you should go get sick. And he said, this spread quite a while back. I don't know why they hadn't already picked it up. They didn't pick it up until after the colon chemo. And I haven't seen the doctor since that day. Just walked out there and turned it by. Quit work. Just walking every day. I get stoned. It's just hard to say. In many ways, I guess I was in denial. They say that's part of it. I guess I didn't even think I was really going to die. And, for the most part. And that was when the planes hit New York. That's 20 years ago. When I was 50, about 7 to 8 years after that, with the doctors, is when God first spoke to me. And again, I'd been an atheist for 50 years. I knew nothing. And one of the first things we did that week, he said, let's go to the bookstore. You need to buy a Talmud. My response was, what's a Talmud? I didn't know anything. I had kept away from religious people. And basically, he was with me. He made sure I did. He orchestrated many things in my life. He took me, early on, he took me on visions 1, 2, 3 a week as part of the teaching and just starting out the preparation process before the pain started getting really bad, which has been up every year since. This is year 13 since it's 13. But as you can see, he was starting to make a little headway. 5 years teaching, 5 years writing blogs, which are the chapters of my book, Isaiah 53 and the Day of the Lord, which is dictated to me by God, just as the life of the righteous servant of Isaiah 53. That's my life. And he dictated. God is my ghostwriter. They're very interesting. And that's how I know all these things that all the great rabbis and the rabbis today didn't know about. That's not proof. Look at the proof that Moses gave to the Israelites so they would believe that God had really sent him to have them released and brought back to the promised land. It's in the Torah. Moses says, who am I? I did the same thing. Picking back up with this, I'm getting there to the end of it. So, exposure to death, that's not dying. The righteous of Israel does not die from the sickness they were given. Now, I don't know in the Holocaust when they were plagued with disease, if everybody had to be plagued before they were gassed and shot. I think the answer is no. I mean, and then to go out and teach this no more longer fits Isaiah 53 than a man in the moon. It instructs God. Because this is God's representative in the day of the Lord. And then it's so easy to find. Jeremiah, see a time is coming, the land blooms again. See it's after desolations. Go look at Isaiah 61. He talks about, he's not talking about the exiles, he's talking about the Russian dispersal in that chapter, the ruined cities and everything being restored. That's today. The temple era exiles that returned didn't do anything with the northern kingdom. It was inhabited by Gentiles. They didn't restore Israel. And I don't know, other than the temple, that they restored Jerusalem. But it's been restored today. See your time is coming. I'll make a new covenant with you. So there you go. And the land blooms again, which simply put means the Jews will come back, and I'm going to come back. He's just waiting. I don't think he killed 6 million people. Murdering them was horrendous atrocity I've ever thought of. To make them come back, that's not him at all. God's like, he's like that old crusty dad that just says, I made all of this for you, this big branch. I did it all. I struggled and I've always dreamed of you taking it all over and continuing our name. And he looks up and his son is in a dapper suit with a suitcase and says, going to the city. And he repeats what he just said. And the son says, no, I don't really want it. No, I mean, it's a nice place, nice land. I know you like me to tend it for you and take care of it and exalt his name in doing so, making it beautiful, building him a house, a new house if he needs one. And then I don't go to the city, man. Now, I realize he's not getting pushed out by the Romans. But, 2,000 years went by plus. With no one really coming back to the story. And that's how the scripture read, and that's how he writes it. I know all the practicalities, Zionism and everything else. But the fact is, they did return in 48, create Israel, and blooms again, Jerusalem's rebuilt, Jeremiah 31. 2 times to come have been fulfilled. Okay, we have a new covenant. There's only 2 covenants unfulfilled in the Hebrew Bible. The covenant of friendship that God grants when David, Moshiach, is here in Malachi 3, the day of the Lord. The chapter of the day of the Lord. And it's the change day of the Lord from all the different references in 5 or 7 other books of a day of terror and destruction, of horrendous plagues where evil is eliminated from the human race, but the good stay. Okay, well that's never going to happen. That's not God's. That's just some stories for antiquity and even today. I mean, it's, you know, I watch zombie movies sometimes. Talking about the resurrection. I don't believe they did a resurrection. I have too much knowledge, science and medicine, and just plain common sense. That's not happening. Go to the place of the resurrection. Briefly, because of Rambam. He's got 13 fundamental principles of Judaism. The 13th is belief. You have to have belief in the resurrection. But where are you going to put the million Israelites in the Exodus? Where are you going to put all their ancestors who were in Egypt for 400 years? People who didn't even cook the food. Because God had to teach them what the animal sacrificial and atonement laws. Bring your animal to a fire. Now share in it. At least the priest teach it. It's better eat if you're going to not drink the blood. Okay? Part of the laws, rules, and commandments. You're trying to cook it. You can drink it all you want. You need to cook it. And that's what that was about. And he did away with it. And even Jesus did that. God no longer wants animals for sin. He prepared a human body for it. That was never intended for a human body. And God knew what the Gentiles were going to do. They were going to come up with an unblemished lamb so they could get sin free. And that's why Isaiah 53 describes the man as blemished and with defect by some of the words. If you look up the definitions of the synonyms, serious injuries, it's an entire life of misery. I am the man of Isaiah 53. I make every verse. My midrash will show you that. And so you have all these things that I'm talking about. Of course, they're in the book. I am the exact opposite of Jesus Christ. I am the blemish, deceived prophet of God. I'm not a lamb. I'm a man. I can't be used for the human sacrifice system if anybody's thinking about it. Because I'm the righteous servant of God. They think, oh, that'll be a good sacrifice. That'll be good. What I want to see, now that we all know the Jews are the righteous servant of God, all of them. It's 7 million in Israel, 7 million in America, and I don't know how many millions in Europe and across the world. I'll just say 14 million. When are they going to make the world righteous? They say they're the righteous servant. When have they made the many righteous and a multitude as one man is it? It's so far from being, it's just as far as Jesus Christ said. They have taken this concept, him, and Jews from Judaism, Michael Sobach and his cohorts, have taken this concept and this idea and they can't back it up one bit, and yet they have convinced because of their unique personalities. Very, very jovial, very nice to listen to, very intelligent, but with false teachings. And thousands of Jewish people believe this. It's Israel. I can't even mention it could be Elijah, much less a Gentile. But that is exactly what God did so he could have his vengeance and vindication against Christianity by saying, you know what? My Isaiah 53 describes a Gentile. I come from Adam. I wasn't allowed to go through Adam with Moses. I come from Adam. In the Talmud, that's Christianity. The South and Adam. I'm coming from Christianity, and it says in chapter 63, and of the peoples, that's his people, the Jewish people, none are with him. Comes with the Gentile. And it's for his vindication against the Christians because he knew what they were going to do. And Jesus is a Jew. He can't fit it. He's not from the stump of Jesse. He's from the felled ancestral tree. He can't be the man of chapter 11, the anointed, Moshiach who is described in 53. He can't be here for so many reasons. His lies and deceit. There may be other rabbis who've seen these things, like Zacharias riding the ass into Jerusalem, and he says, I'm going to be crucified there by the Gentiles. When you look it up, and he says, all the prophets like this have made. Well, there's 20 prophets in the Jewish Bible, and not one of them says it. What one does say is, the Moshiach will ride ass into Jerusalem. Basically means he's going to be a humble man that doesn't have to be created by me. God's making sure Moses ended up being the most humble man on earth. And I know why. It's because of how God treated him. But I got too much of David that I have to show in the purposes that I have. My spirit is still furious. But the good thing is, I don't feel the fury inside. He can have me talk like this, like I'm furious, and I'm fine. This stuff is, I won't even hardly understand it. It's incredible. The stories I could tell people once this gets on, just sitting around there, you know, for those who truly believe. And the evidence is overwhelming. Cannot believe it. It's really to tell me you never believed Moses. You and your ancestors would have died in Egypt. You would have gone, you'd have stayed. You can't use animal sacrifice for human beings. It's just mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling. Okay, let me see where I'm at. I think I'm about done. You know, when Tovia Singer says in his commentary on 10, and I had this in quote, so I pulled that out from that. He says that this phrase, that if he made himself an offering for guilt, is interpreted by Rabbi Singer to be, quote, actually, literally translated as guilt offering. Now, he is very well known for interpreting the Bible of his own, without using anybody else's translations. And his people listen to him all the time to see what the translations should be and how maybe the Christian Bible got things wrong, or even the Hebrew Bible. I don't think we've ever seen that. But in particular, a lot of these people are Christians who have converted to Judaism, or they are Jews who were Christians just by how they were raised, and then I guess Messianic Jews too sometimes. But they look at him for translations, and look at the words he uses. Talk about deceptive. Actually, literally, translated as guilt offering. The JPS, a panel of men who worked their lives at interpretation of translations, they didn't come up with that. Rabbis from Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and then linguistic experts from universities, well-esteemed, well-pedigreed. And they don't say it's actually literally a guilt offering. And that's what God's saying, so let's use his animal sacrificial system. And in Tovia's case, let's offer up 6 million Jews. You see, none of that works. And none of it works. So what he's really saying is God just murdered 6 million Jews to scare them all back to the promised land. That's all he's really saying. Does anybody think God did that? I don't. I don't. I don't even think, when he says he put a plague against them in antiquity, that he really did. I think the plague was just there, no different than the pandemic we're under. Well, much different, but that's just the way times were when he didn't have medicine, people didn't cook their food, and this and that, he would tell you. He said that I took credit for him to scare them. I had to scare these people that they had. You know, so it goes up to Moses. You go talk to them and come tell us what he says. We're all going to die. You know, you feared God. But not that. Even Judaism is starting to get into the Christian thing of God wants a personal relationship with you. Well, you better go back to the mountain if you think that's true. That's not who he is. You're starting to associate him as a human being. That you want a relationship, that doesn't mean he does. That doesn't mean he doesn't want to do the things he says he's going to do for his creation. He's got a different perspective. He's not human. He is an entity, a being in existence that does have emotions, but he's got absolute knowledge and absolute power. He thinks it, puts it in a vision, he wills it to be. There is a process which goes by with his elements of the unseen, primarily his power. You know, we have all this water on earth, and Moses' name was pulled from watching this and that. Do you know that there's tiny microscopic particles of water, H2O, in outer space? He drew it with his power from the far corners of the universe to his planet. He decides everything, and that's just the way it is. And he doesn't care for the fact that the rabbis have decided to stay in antiquity in the Dark Ages. And anything those people came up with which fit their world, but can possibly fit our world, they need to change. He expected more of it. They dismissed. This is the record. I'm bringing it for him. That he orchestrates every single word from my mouth. Bottom line? Bottom line. Here it is. Let me finish up with this. Who receives the long life? I want to know who receives the long life. Because it's not Hitler and it's not the victims of the Holocaust. Who receives the long life? No one. Would God accept an animal sacrifice of blemished humans from the Gentile Hitler? No. He wouldn't. He doesn't accept human sacrifice, period. Were the much less lamb sacrifices for guilt. For being guilty of destroying self, stealing self, theft, this and that. It's not the guilt we're talking about. This verb and adverb or verb and noun. This is the emotion guilt. They said they were sick. Okay, the man's called the righteous servant. What do you think happens? It's because they're sick, because they feel guilty of the sins they've made against God and in their lives and with their family. They told their family of having an affair. Anything. Those are the people who are sick, who need to understand that God does work people of little faith. That God does do what he says he's going to do, and he does it in the manner he's always done it. He selects a man. And to the day of the Lord, he described him. And you knew how difficult it was going to be in this age of secularism, atheism. Yeah. Taught me, I'm an atheist. But he taught me up well. And after the 5 years of learning, the 5 years of writing, we had a little over a year to put the first book together, Isaiah 53 and the Day of the Lord. And then just recently, that was a year and a half or better ago, and then here just recently, he just all of a sudden had me write The Life of God's Righteous Servant, dictated it to me, and it didn't take 7 days to put it together, although I'm still tinkering with it, changing things, which makes me feel like I'm part of it. He does that for me. I always feel like I'm still myself, still make mistakes and errors, this and that, but when I'm dealing with his stuff, I don't ever worry about it, because I know he's doing it perfectly as he wants it. Were the victims of the Holocaust crushed with disease? I don't think so. I've never heard such a thing. Are the 6 million murdered Jews of the Holocaust all the Jews gathered as one man? No. Did God murder 6 million Jews? No. Have the Jewish people as one man made the many multitude righteous? No. The 6 million murdered